We are live. This is the Impunity Observer monthly live stream. I am the publisher of the Impunity Observer. My name is Fergus Hodgson. We are a geopolitical intelligence service provider. Go to impunityobserver.com for our content. Get on our monthly e-newsletter. Follow us for real-time updates on Twitter, Telegram, all over the place. We do this each month just to catch up and discuss what work we're doing, to put it in a maybe more digestible format. And usually we have Steve Hecht, our editor-at-large, but because of the recent assassination in Ecuador, which was on Wednesday, I invited Mauro Echeverría, our deputy editor in Ecuador. Okay, we're live right now. Okay, this starting is very confusing, but this is the Impunity Observer monthly live stream. I'm your host and publisher of the Impunity Observer, Fergus Hodgson. Thanks for tuning in. Go to our website, impunityobserver.com, for all the updates and get real-time updates over Telegram, Twitter. You'll find us there. The best way to keep in touch really is through our monthly e-newsletter, and you can also subscribe for unlimited access. We usually do these monthly live streams with Steve Hecht, our co-founder and editor-at-large. But this month, given the assassination in Ecuador, I thought it would be prudent to work with Mauro Echeverría, our deputy editor in Quito, Ecuador, and examine what exactly has happened with the death of Fernando Villavicencio. Okay, Mauro, welcome to the live stream. And let's first just clarify what happened. So there's a lot of noise that's been going on internationally about this assassination, but let's just clarify how many people were involved, who are the alleged perpetrators, how much support did this gentleman have, how much of a threat was he to actually getting into the presidency, why would he have been targeted?
Hello, Fergus, and thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Talking about Fernando Villavicencio, he was a very controversial figure.
Yes.
He was attacked while leaving a campaign event at about 6:20, 6:30 local time here in Ecuador. There were allegedly 6 gunmen who fired around 40 bullets against him, and 3 of them hit Villavicencio in the face. He was a 59-year-old politician. He used to be a journalist. He was now a politician recently, but he used to focus his investigations on corruption, on mafias, on narcos, and on high-ranked government officials. So he was really feared by everyone because he always kept uncovering and revealing new stuff, new cases. In fact, it was after his investigation, his bribery investigation against Rafael Correa officials, that Rafael Correa and his vice president Jorge Glass were both sentenced to 8 years in prison. In terms of how popular he was, as I tell you, a controversial figure. So it is hard to measure. Some polls were saying that he was in the 2nd place. Some others were saying he was 3rd, and some others were saying he was 4th. However, it is clear that he was probably one of the favorites to get to the runoff, which with the candidate, which is now the favorite presidential candidate, Luisa González. Luisa González is a candidate from Rafael Correa. So it was basically Correísmo versus one of the next 3 contenders for the runoff, in case there's a runoff, which is still uncertain.
Okay. Now let's clarify these charges, because I did read that he himself was charged and went into exile. Do you want to clarify what happened to him there?
Sure. Villavicencio was charged by former President Rafael Correa because Correa was saying that that he made false allegations against Correa, and that Villavicencio was staining Correa's name. So he went to exile, and he came back with the Lenín Moreno administration, which was Correa's successor. So he came back and continued working on investigations. He went to the Amazon region, he went then to Peru, and then he came back to Ecuador. So basically, he was always against Correa and socialists, 21st century socialists, as we call them here in Latin America, which are the same that for the Sao Paulo Forum. It's basically the group with Lula, Gustavo Petro, and all the leftists in Latin America. One thing I would like to clarify about Fernando Villavicencio, is that many people right now in the media are calling him that he was a right-wing candidate. I wouldn't say he was right-wing, because he used to be a member of Pachacutic, which is a leftist movement here in Ecuador. He used to be a union leader. So I wouldn't exactly say he was leftist, but what we can certainly say is that Villavicencio was definitely against 21st century socialists. He was always against them. So I would say he was also leftist, but not in the sense of or in the same level as 21st century socialists.
So let's just clarify there. I think you got a little bit mixed up there. So basically, calling him a right winger or something like that is simply not accurate. He was a union leader, a working man's candidate. And he simply was, let's say, an old-fashioned leftist who did not like to see parasitism or corruption in his own ranks. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that is exactly what Villavicencio was. And yeah, there's not much other words to describe him in an ideological way.
And let's just clear up these charges. So he was charged with defaming Rafael Correa, and I think it was an 8-month sentence, and he went up into the Amazon, but then eventually got settled in Peru. And then Lenín Moreno, who was the following president after Correa, he was also of the left, but less, let's say, aggressive or dictatorial than Correa, and so he was more inclined to let Villavicencio back into the country. Now, what were the Jorge Glass and Correa, what were their charges, and did they serve any time?
Sure. Glass was in prison for about 8 years. He recently came out of prison, like if I'm not wrong, in July or June. And Correa is now a fugitive from Ecuadorian law, and he lives in Belgium. So he never got to serve any time. It is thought that when Correa comes back, he will serve time in prison, but I think he's never been back to Ecuador. He's always traveled to Mexico. He's traveled to Gustavo Petro's inauguration. He's traveled multiple times to Argentina, but he has never set a foot on Ecuador since he was charged with this sentence.
What is such a bizarre scenario with this gentleman who pretends to be a leader? He's really just a fugitive from justice, and he's hiding away in Belgium, away from his home country. And okay, now let's just talk about the context a little bit, because as we discussed before going live, the fact is that this did not come out of nowhere, that there were many threats. And just 2-3 weeks ago, the mayor of Manta, one of the chief port cities of Ecuador, was also murdered. So this, in some ways, is just an escalation of that process.
Yeah, totally. This is just like we're seeing with facts how violence is escalating in Ecuador. And this is not just political violence, it is violence in general. And there's a dominance of narco presence in the Ecuadorian state, and that's just a fact. And Villavicencio, in fact, was one of the people who were investigating this, and we can see this we can see the rising violence not only in politicians, but it happens everywhere. For example, there are coastal cities like Esmeraldas, Manta, that are seeing an increase in violence and an increased presence of narcos in general. There's a lot of extortion towards local businesses. These cities are being taken over by narcos and criminal organizations that have no fear, and they are basically right now dominating the country, and causing a lot of fear in Ecuadorian citizens. So yeah, I mean, Villavicencio was one of the people who has always shown to be against them. However, I mean, this can set up a whole new precedent and a whole new paradigm.
Yeah, and let's just touch on a few of the details of this event. So first, all the suspects. So there were six in custody, and one was shot at the crime scene and then died later. All were Colombian nationals. Is this the perception in Ecuador that in some ways it's an imported criminal racket that's taking over the country, that it's not homegrown?
The perception here in Ecuador it's hard to say, because we have a lot of Colombian nationals here in Ecuador. We have a lot of Venezuelan nationals here in Ecuador, and in fact, there are reports that Ecuadorian or criminal organizations have been working with Mexican criminal organizations, Colombian criminal organizations, and Venezuelan criminal organizations. So it is really hard to say if these Colombians were working on a national organization, or they were on behalf of a foreign criminal organization. About the details, it is said, according to a report of Noticias Caracol from Colombia, that these 6 Colombian nationals that are allegedly the gunmen in Villavicencio's crime, they had contact with at least 3 Ecuadorian politicians, which are not yet revealed, but as the investigations are still ongoing. But this is just like mind-blowing to see how other Ecuadorian politicians can be involved in this.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that, yes, these particular gentlemen were foreigners. However, they could have just been contracted by locals. And I should note that in the Manta killing of the mayor of Manta, the driver of the assassin was Venezuelan. They did not catch the gunman himself. Now, Guillermo Lasso, the sitting president who has dissolved the parliament and is just waiting for the election on August 20, so just 2 weeks away, or less than 2 weeks now, he has called in U.S. support, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Why is that a thing? Is that really going to scare anyone? Why is that happening?
Yeah, I believe that the Lasso administration is doing that because Lasso himself is aware that there's no justice in Ecuador. I mean, impunity is rampant in Ecuador. It happens every day. Every day there are murderers that are being set free from prison. So I think Guillermo Lasso does this to show probably the material and intellectual authors of the Villavicencio crime that there's probably going to be consequences in this specific case, at least. And for in the name of Villavicencio, his family, his friends, and the entire country, I hope we can find the authors of this murder, because otherwise it just sets a new precedent for other politicians, other people that want to speak up, and it's not. It undermines the rule of law also.
Well, 100%. If you see a mayor and a congressman who's now who was a presidential candidate getting knocked off, are you going to open your mouth to challenge the cartels? No. So it really does undermine free speech. It undermines, who can or is willing to run in elections. It has a serious or terrible chilling effect on the country. And I should note also that the Movimiento Construye, or it might be the building movement or movement that is building, the English translation would be, they said that their own headquarters were attacked also. Do you want to comment on why that would have been necessary, that the hope would be just to shut down that party or intimidate the entire party?
Sure. I'm not sure what the intention was, but I think, in my opinion, it was to create a little bit more chaos, to make the party fear them and fear these organizations or whoever did it. It is important to highlight that Villavicencio was threatened by multiple different criminal organizations, so it is still very uncertain to attribute this crime to a specific organization as of now. There was a video circulating online that these were a group that the Villavicencio's murder authors were a criminal group called Lobos, which means like wolves in English.
Yes. Yeah.
However, this group made a new video in jail saying that they were not the perpetrators of this crime. So it's still very fresh to know who this was. And in fact, we still don't know who was the killer of Agustin Tiago, which was the mayor of Manta. So it is hard to say that we will know certainly who was the author in at least some time.
Yeah, so Guillermo Lasso goes on stage and says, this crime will not go unpunished. But of course, how can he promise that? He doesn't know, right? So even if he brings in the FBI, we can't assure that. So I fear that there's a little bit of political grandstanding, and whether they'll actually find. And the problem is too that these would have been mercenaries or hired thugs, that the actual real, as you said, the authors or those pulling the strings, they're the ones who really need to be punished in this instance. But whether we'll find out who that was, I don't know. Now, in terms of our work, our colleague Andres Sebastian Diaz Ponce, or just Sebas as we call him, he has been writing on this. I just was concerned his English wouldn't be strong enough to go on the live stream. But he has written about, almost a year ago, he wrote an article, The Origins of Escalating Violence in Ecuador. And then more recently, kind of sadly in terms of timing, just in June, so right before both of these two incidents, he wrote, Why Ecuador's Law Enforcement is No Match for Narcos. Now, we'll put these in the show notes, and let me put these in the live stream feed. I'll put the links to these two articles. These are important ones, and you can also get them on my LinkedIn, to be frank. But why don't you comment, Mauro, on why there's been such a spike in just the last 2 years? Of course, crime was always a problem in Ecuador, right? I've had friends who've been kidnapped and drugged in Ecuador, but it appears that something changed a couple of years ago. What changed in recent times?
Yeah, so there's a lot of theories about that. Some of them say that leftist governments from Lenin Moreno and Correa had agreements with these mafias, but there was a particular event that really created this spike in violence, which was the murder of a gang leader. And then what this caused was the separation of multiple gangs, different gangs from the same gang. So
I see.
New gangs emerged, and they are now fighting for a territory control, routes to take more narco traffic. They are fighting for this, and also they are fighting for just power in general. And connecting this with Villavicencio's murder, Villavicencio was complaining about an alleged tie between Ecuadorian police and military officials with narcos and criminal organizations.
Yeah.
And what we can see is that there are many cases of police officers being bought off by narcos, and this is something that happens in all Latin America, in border controls and etc. So he was talking about this, and this can also be a factor that helped this spike in violence. Also, they have gained control in jails. That is why we have seen over these last couple of years a lot of news about Ecuadorian jails and massacres inside Ecuadorian jails, because gangs are dominating inside of the jails, and they are fighting each other, because jails are their center of control. They have internet, they have even found animals with them on these jails. So this also is another factor, that the lack of control in prisons is another factor that leads to this spike in violence.
Yeah, what an irony, really. The place where they're supposed to be locked up, they're actually most active in their criminal activities. It's insane. Now, there's another piece of the puzzle which Sebas referred to, and this is in the book, in the article, Why Ecuador's Law Enforcement is No Match for Narcos, that I wouldn't say there's a defund the police movement in Ecuador, but there is a great deal of suspicion or hostility towards them. So they feel as though they're going to be, the other ones will be prosecuted if they do anything.
Yeah, so what happens here is that there are presence of police officers attacking and shooting criminals, and being the police officers who shot the criminals being imprisoned. So there's also a big fear by police officials that if they shoot or they kill any criminal, they can be taken to jail. And this is because the judicial system here in Ecuador seems to be, at least it seems to be, supporting criminals instead of police officers, police officials. And we can see that by criminals, alleged killers, being released 3-5 days by judges here in Ecuador, being released from prison.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the problem, that it appears that organized crime, along with maybe ideological partners in the judicial system, are going after those who want to actually uphold the law, that flip their role on its head. And this is what, let me just read a little bit what Sebas said. He said that even though Guillermo Lasso signed a decree to enable the armed forces alongside the police to carry out operations against gangs, because Lasso is leaving office in November, right? So we're going to have an election this month, and then probably a runoff, and then the new president in November. This leaves the door wide open for officers to be prosecuted for killing alleged criminals in raids, as they have been many times before. So basically, the police are going to say, why would I risk my own freedom and future in an extremely dangerous, and I assume not terribly well-paid job? And so they just won't. They'll just look the other way. And so is this leading to a rise of, let's say, a response paramilitary or private security force?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call them paramilitaries, but we can see here right now I'm in Quito, and we can see that there's a lot of businesses that now have their own security officers. They hire private security. Instead, the people here are, when it's at night, at least from around 6 p.m., 5 p.m., we can see that many businesses, restaurants, bars, almost all kind of businesses are hiring private security. So it is something that is definitely visible to everyone. I remember 5 years ago, this was not the case. I mean, we all relied on police officers, although we were always aware that, I mean, there has always been criminal activity here in Ecuador.
Yeah.
We were always aware that, I mean, if it gets dark, it's probably a bit dangerous, but we were never really this afraid as we are right now. And we can see that in almost every business, every bar, every restaurant, every event.
Yeah. Well, there's a kind of a chilling timeliness to this assassination, because just this month, we're in August, we're working on an article, on an investigation. You're leading this investigation, as far as I know, into why journalists are fleeing Ecuador. And the thing is that in the past, there have been, let's say, threats, or there's been intimidation, or like you said, with Correa, people getting sent to prison or sentenced to prison for criticizing him, and him losing his temper because he said I should keep my mouth clean here, but he has little patience, let's put it that way. And however, we've gone beyond just political intimidation and words. People are losing their lives for speaking out. And so why would journalists stay? And do you want to comment just on the initial work that you're doing regarding this investigation?
Sure. We're talking with a couple of journalists. Some of them have been threatened. These threats, as far as I know, they do not come from the state. In contrast to previous years, in Correa's time, we were certain that Correa himself was the one blaming the press, and he was saying always prensa corrupta, which means that the press is corrupt, and stuff like this, and constant aggressions. But right now, it is mostly from criminal organizations. We're aware that the Albanian mafia is operating here, and in fact, I am sure, because I've talked to some people close to Anderson Boscan, which is one of the latest journalists that fled Ecuador.
Yes.
That it was the Albanian mafia who threatened Boscan, his family, and also the rest of the team at La Posta, which is the media where Boscan work.
Right. And let me just touch upon, well, gosh, I didn't even know about the Albanian mafia at work in Ecuador. I mean, everyone seems to be having a crack to take over Ecuador lately. Now, Sebastian, in his article, did refer to this lack of control of prisons, which seems to be a real chokehold, or real sensitive point, where you would think, if you want to get a grip on this, go for the prisons right away. So in 2021, 2022, there were 11, let's say, massacres or major violent events, and 419 prisoners died. So you've got more than 400 prisoners being killed in 2 years. Something's going on, right? This should be the place where they're locked up to, I guess, pay their due, and this is not happening at all. And as Sebas writes, some of the ringleaders are in jail, so the prisons become their operation centers. And the main gangs, the choneros, the Latin kings, the wolves or lobos, the tiburones, and fatals or fatals, I don't know how you pronounce that one, they dominate access to the coastal prison that holds the most dangerous prisoners. So basically, they run the prisons, and they dictate to the police who can and cannot enter. What kind of insanity is this? And why has Lasso failed to address this? Because I'm sure he knows what's going on. He's aware of this.
Yes, so that's the question we all ask ourselves. Why has Lasso not managed to control prisons? He's been in power for over 2 years, and the main thing is that prisons are supposed to be the place where you control and you make criminals pay their due. But this doesn't happen in Ecuador, and what I can see from the government right now, is that he has appointed people that are incapable of doing the job, of getting the job done.
Yes.
And yeah, and what I think also is that he doesn't have a clear idea of what's happening. I mean, we are all aware that he knows that jails are having this issue, that prisoners are controlling the jails, but I mean, his security advisors are not telling him the reality, or he's just not taking action on this. And the reason why is something we're still debating here in Ecuador.
Okay, folks, look, Mauro obviously has plenty to say, and I'm so glad we could get coverage on the ground from Ecuador. Mauro Echeverría, Deputy Editor of the Impunity Observer, a wonderful man in our team. He is working on an investigation just targeted on this topic this month, and we obviously planned this before the event took place, so we were aware of this rising problem. Go to impunityobserver.com, get on our monthly e-newsletter. It's completely free. And you'll receive, yes, just 1 month with a commentary overview from me, and then a summary about, and then links to all our content for the month. And then if you pay, I think it's just $20 per month, you can get unlimited access to all the content. You can get up to 6 articles for free. So we're very generous with making our content available. Otherwise, Mauro, yes, thank you for joining me and for explaining this to the international audience. I look forward to being in touch. Cheers.